On beaches in the Solomons, in the snow outside Bastogne, in the dust of Tunisia and the rubble of German towns, the same vehicle kept turning up. A box of armor plate riding on truck wheels at the front and tank tracks at the back. Soldiers rode in it, fought from it, slept against its sides, and cursed it when the bullets came through. To the men who used it, it was simply the half-track. But that single name hid something the enemy rarely appreciated. Behind almost every version, the troop carrier, the mortar wagon, the tank hunter, the anti-aircraft gun that filled the sky with tracer, sat one and the same machine underneath. The same engine, the same gearbox, the same rubber tracks turning over the same bogie wheels. It is one of the great untold efficiencies of the Second World War. While other armies designed a new vehicle for every new problem, the United States found one good answer and asked it the question over and over again. The United States built a single half-track, and then it built a war out of it. To understand the family, you have to start with the part nobody photographed for the recruiting posters, the chassis. The recipe was borrowed from the French, who had been experimenting with the Cagresse rubber band track since the 1920s. The Americans took the idea, simplified it, and standardized it for mass production. Up front, a conventional truck axle with two large wheels for steering. At the rear, in place of a second axle, two endless bands of rubber and steel track running over sprockets and bogie wheels. The driver steered with a wheel like any truck, and the tracks did the hard work in the mud. The heart of it was a six-cylinder white engine, the 160AX. A little under 390 cubic inches, an L-head design putting out around 147 oppression at 3,000 revolutions. Modest figures for a vehicle of this weight. The half-track was never quick, and on a hard road it would top out somewhere in the 40s. But it would go almost anywhere a tracked vehicle could, while still rolling on tires that any motor pool could service. Power went through a 4-speed gearbox into a transfer case that could throw drive forward to the front wheels when the going turned soft. Behind that, Timken axles. 2 fuel tanks of 30 gallons each, self-sealing, tucked inside the body. A winch or a roller at the nose for hauling the vehicle out of the holes it inevitably found. The armor was thin, 1/4 of an inch in most places, enough to stop rifle fire and shell splinters, and not much more. The top was open to the sky. That suspension deserves a closer look because it is the part that made the whole idea work. The tracks were endless bands, rubber molded over steel cables that ran the full length of the loop. Steel guide plates bolted along the inside kept them seated on the bogie rollers and sprockets, and the edges of the track carried raised tabs for grip. Flat spiral springs in each bogie soaked up the worst of the ground. At the very back, an idler wheel rode on a spring-loaded arm, designed to hold constant tension as the track stretched and the terrain heaved. It was a forgiving piece of engineering. A crew could even fit conventional tire chains over the side runs of the track when the snow got deep enough to demand them. 3 companies turned these out: the White Motor Company, Autocar, and Diamond T. The components were interchangeable by design, so a vehicle assembled in one plant could be repaired with parts from another. That interchangeability is the quiet hero of this whole story. It meant the Army could take the very same frame, engine, and running gear and bolt an entirely different war machine on top. For the men who drove them, the half-track asked for a particular set of hands. 4 speeds forward and 1 reverse, a transfer case to bring in the front wheels when the ground turned soft, and a clutch that wanted double declutching to change gear cleanly. Many carried a winch on the nose, run off the engine through the power takeoff, for the moments when even tracks were not enough, and the vehicle had to haul itself out by a cable hooked round a tree. None of it was glamorous. All of it was the kind of rugged, repairable simplicity that wins long wars rather than single battles. So that is the foundation. Now watch what the Army does with it. The family begins with 2 near twins, and the difference between them comes down to a few feet of steel and a question of who was supposed to ride inside. The car M2 was the shorter of the two. Designed as a prime mover for artillery and as a scout and command vehicle, it had a compartment built for working rather than carrying. Inside the sides ran a rail with a skate mount so a machine gun could be slid around the top edge of the body and brought to bear in almost any direction. The M2 was the reconnaissance man's mount, the artillery officer's runabout, the vehicle that went forward to see what was there. The M2A1 refined the idea. Out went the skate rail, and in its place came a raised ring mount over the front, a small armored pulpit from which a gunner could work a heavy .50 caliber. It was a cleaner solution, and it pointed the way the whole family would go. Stretch that same chassis and you get the personnel carrier M3. A longer body, a rear door, bench seats facing inward, room for a squad and their kit. This was the workhorse, the vehicle that carried armored infantry into battle alongside the tanks, that kept pace across country where a truck would have bogged down. Inside, the same gun rail arrangement let the crew put fire over the sides. And then the M3A1 did to the carrier what the M2A1 had done to the car. The skate rail gave way to a raised pulpit ring mounted high on the right side of the driver's compartment, carrying a .50 caliber machine gun with a commanding field of fire. That pulpit, nicknamed without much affection, became one of the most recognizable shapes of the war. In service, the M3 found its true calling running with the tanks. American armored doctrine wanted infantry that could keep pace with the Shermans across broken country, dismount at the objective, and fight as a combined team. The half-track was what made that possible. It was not built to charge enemy positions, and crews who used it that way paid for the mistake. Its work was to carry men forward through ground that would have swallowed a truck, then set them on their feet where they were needed. The crews had a darker name for the open top. With nothing overhead, a single mortar round or a tree burst of artillery could rake the whole compartment, and the men took to calling it the Purple Heart Box. They rode in it regardless, because the alternative was walking, and walking meant arriving late and worn out to a fight the tanks had already begun. 2 vehicles, 4 subtypes, and already you can see the logic. Lengthen the hull for cargo and men. Raise the gun for the crew that has to fight from it. The same engine, the same tracks, the same axles humming away underneath. The Army has not yet built a single specialized weapon, and it is about to build 9. The first specialists carried their war on a high arc. Drop an 81mm mortar into the bed of the carrier, and you have the mortar carriers M4 and M4A1. The crew of these vehicles, 8 men, rode with the weapon facing the rear, ready to dismount and set it on the ground, or in a pinch to fire it straight from the vehicle. The earlier M4 mounted the mortar to fire toward the back of the hull. The M4A1 strengthened the mounting so the tube could be fired in place more readily, and added a pedestal for a heavy machine gun and rifle scabbards down the sides for the crew's own weapons. Look down into one of these, and you see the whole philosophy of the family laid out in steel. Ammunition racks lining the bed, the base plate stowed and ready to drop, the tube on its mount. A self-contained mortar section that could roll up behind a ridge, lob its high explosive over the crest, and pull back before counterfire found it, all on a chassis identical to the one carrying riflemen a few hundred yards down the road. The mortar crew did not need a truck and a separate gun and a third vehicle for ammunition. It needed one half-track, and the half-track gave them everything. Then the Army went looking for more weight of shell and gave the infantry its own pocket artillery. The 75mm howitzer motor carriage T-30 mounted a short-barreled pack howitzer behind an armored shield at the front of the fighting compartment. It was a close support weapon, meant to roll alongside the assault and put high explosive onto strong points over open sights. A crew of 5 worked it. Want still more weight of shell? Take the same body, brace it harder, and fit a 105mm howitzer. That gave the T-19, the heaviest gun the basic half-track hull would willingly carry. A gun pedestal at the rear center, a machine gun for local defense, and the fuel tanks shifted to the sides to clear the breach. 6 men served it. The recoil of a 105 in a vehicle this light was punishing, and the springs and frame took a beating every time it fired. Mortars, a 75, a 105. 3 different fire missions, 3 different weapons, 1 chassis under every one of them. In the deserts of North Africa, the Americans met German armor and discovered they had brought too few guns that could kill it. The answer, improvised and then made official, was to take the longest anti-tank gun that would fit and stand it up in the back of a half-track. The 75mm Gun Motor Carriage M3 mounted a full-caliber 75, an old French field gun design, modernized, on a pedestal in the fighting compartment, firing forward over the cab behind an armor shield. The crew of 5 worked it in the open, the long barrel reaching out past the radiator. As a tank destroyer, it was a compromise that everyone understood. The half-track's thin armor offered no protection in a gun duel, and the high silhouette made it easy to spot. But the gun itself was effective at the ranges of 1942 and 1943, and the vehicle could go where towed guns could not. In the Philippines, against lighter Japanese tanks, these things were lethal. In Tunisia, they bought time the army badly needed. The M3A1 brought small refinements to the mounting and the shield. As better, purpose-built tank destroyers came into service, vehicles with armor and a turret and a fighting chance in a gun duel, the half-track gun carriages were gradually pulled back from the anti-tank role. Many had their guns removed and went back to hauling and carrying. But for a crucial stretch of the war, this half-track variant was the American answer to the Panzer, and it was built on exactly the same frame as the troop carrier it had started life as. There is a particular irony worth pausing on. The gun these vehicles carried was a descendant of a field piece from the previous war, mounted in a vehicle that was never meant to fight tanks at all. And yet, in the Philippines in 1941 and 1942, with almost nothing else available, these improvised tank hunters held the line against Japanese armor and bought the defenders precious weeks. A stopgap, built from spare parts of an idea, doing the work of a weapon that did not yet exist. The last and most spectacular branch of the family looked straight up. Allied columns on the move were vulnerable to air attack, and the cure was volume of fire, as many bullets into a patch of sky as a vehicle could throw. The half-track, open-topped and roomy, was the natural platform. The first attempt was the M13, an electrically powered turret carrying 2.50 caliber machine guns, traversing a full circle, with folding side and rear panels that dropped down to give the gunners room to swing. Its own battery charging unit kept the turret powered. 2 heavy machine guns turning 360 degrees made a respectable threat to low-flying aircraft. The M15 took a different approach and mixed its calibers. A manually operated turret carried 3 weapons firing together. A 37mm automatic cannon flanked by 2.50 caliber machine guns. The 37 reached out where the heavy machine guns could not, and the tracer of all 3 converging gave the gunner a visible cone of fire to walk onto a target. The driver's compartment and the gun turret were built as separate units. A crew of 7 kept it fed. The M15A1 that followed rearranged the mounting, bringing the cannon down to the same level as the machine guns rather than perching it above them, which made the whole weapon easier to lay and to load. And then came the one everyone remembers. The multiple gun motor carriage M16 took the M13's electric turret and packed it with 4.50 caliber machine guns. The folding panels were notched so the guns could depress further over the sides. 4 heavy machine guns on a powered mount, hosing out streams of half-inch rounds, earned the M16 its nickname, the Meat Chopper. Its job was air defense, but the men on the ground found another use for it. Turned against troops in the open, against buildings, against anything soft, 4.5s on a traversing mount were a horror. By the later campaigns in Europe, with the Luftwaffe largely swept from the sky, the M16 spent as much time firing flat as it did firing up. In the Ardennes, and in the fighting through the German towns, the quad mount became a ground support weapon that infantry learned to love having on their flank and dreaded meeting on the other side. A single burst could strip the cover from a hedgerow or silence a window in seconds. One more variant closed the circle. The 81mm mortar carrier M21 returned to the mortar, but turned it around to fire forward over the nose on the longer carrier body. A crew of 6, an 81mm tube, a .50 caliber machine gun, and a submachine gun for defense. It was the mortar carrier reimagined for a more aggressive, forward-firing role. It is worth stepping inside for a moment, because the half-track was not only a fighting machine, it was a home. For the men of an armored division, this open box of steel was where they lived for weeks at a stretch. Bedrolls lashed to the sides, ammunition and rations stowed in the racks the manual laid out so precisely. A radio for the command vehicles, scabbards for rifles, a heavy machine gun on its pulpit, ready. In the cold, the engine's warmth was something to huddle near. In the heat, the open top at least let the air move. The maintenance fell on the crew. Grease every fitting on the schedule. Check the track tension with a length of string and a weight, the way the manual showed. Watch the idler. Clean the air cleaner. Top up 2 30-gallon tanks that could drink a vehicle dry on a long road march. The half-track rewarded a crew that cared for it and punished one that did not, and the men learned its moods the way cavalry once learned their horses. That intimacy is part of why the vehicle is remembered with such affection, despite its faults. The thin armor and the open top were real failings, but the men trusted it to start, to climb, to carry them, and to bring them home, and across a long war, it mostly did. The genius of the half-track was never any single version. Taken on its own, each one had a flaw a critic could point to. The armor was thin. The top was open. The tank destroyer was a compromise. The howitzer carriages were stopgaps, and the open fighting compartments left crews exposed to anything that came over the side. What made the family matter was the thing they shared. Tens of thousands of these vehicles came off American production lines, more than 40,000 of all types before the war was done. And because the chassis beneath them was common, they could be built fast, supplied with common parts, and repaired in the field with whatever was at hand. A motor pool that could keep a personnel carrier running could keep a quad 50 running, because underneath, they were the same machine. A spare bogie wheel fit them all. A man trained on one engine knew every engine in the family. They went everywhere. American armored divisions built their infantry around them. The British, the Free French, and the Soviets received them through Lend-Lease and pressed them into roles of their own, some of which the original designers never imagined. From the Solomon Islands to the Ardennes, from the deserts of Tunisia to the streets of Germany, the silhouette was the same, and so was the engineering note humming away beneath the fighting. Long after 1945, half-tracks soldiered on in armies around the world, some of them still in service decades later, a testament to how right the basic machine had been. The half-track was not the best armored vehicle of the war, nor the fastest, nor the most survivable. It did not need to be any of those things. It needed to be everywhere at once, in a dozen different shapes, and that is exactly what it was. The Americans designed one machine and then asked it to be 11. It said yes to all of them. One chassis, 11 weapons, and a war that, in no small part, rode to victory on rubber tracks and truck tires.